Hi students, today we are going to revise the poem Aunt Jennifer's Tigers written by Adrienne Rich. It's a poem in your class 12 CBSE book Flamingo. So let's get going. Before we start revising the poem, let me tell you the content of this video. First, we'll know something about the poet. Then, I'll tell you the theme of the poem. I will also tell you the synopsis of the poem stanza-wise. We will critically appreciate the poem. We will also discuss the poetic devices used by the poet. Finally, we will analyze the symbolism and irony used by the poet so extensively. Let's get going. Let me introduce you to the poet of Aunt Jennifer's Tigers, Adrienne Rich. Adrienne Rich was born in Baltimore, Maryland, USA. She is widely known for her involvement in contemporary women's movement as a poet and theorist. She has published 19 volumes of poetry, 3 collections of essays and other writings. A strong resistance to racism and militarism echoes through her work. The poem Aunt Jennifer's Tigers addresses the constraints of married life a woman experiences. Let me now tell you the theme of the poem. In her poem Aunt Jennifer's Tigers, Adrienne Rich addresses the issue of male dominance. The poem brings out the struggles and conflicts a woman has to go through in male chauvinistic society. Aunt Jennifer, the protagonist, is symbolic of women all over the world who are victims of oppression at the hands of patriarchal system. Thus, the poem illustrates the poet's feminist concerns. Before we discuss the poem further, it is important that we read the poem once and appreciate it. Aunt Jennifer's Tigers. Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across a screen, bright topaz denizens of a world of green. They do not fear the men beneath the tree. They pace in sleek, chivalric certainty. Aunt Jennifer's fingers fluttering through her wool, find even the ivory needle hard to pull. The massive weight of Uncle's wedding band sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand. When Aunt is dead, her terrified hands will lie, still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. The tigers in the panel that she made will go on, prancing, proud and unafraid. Now, we will paraphrase the first stanza. The first stanza describes Aunt's tigers made by her on her tapestry. The poet describes them as bright colored like the shining golden yellow jeweled topaz. They are free inhabitants of the green forest and are not scared of the men standing under the tree. These tigers move about with grace, elegance and confidence. Aunt Jennifer's tigers are not real or living tigers. They are images created by her on tapestry. Aunt Jennifer, who is held captive by the oppressive hand of a patriarchal society, creates in her art an alternate world of freedom. The tiger represents her dreams, her desire to be free from constant fear and oppression that govern her life. These majestic and fearless tigers also present a sharp contrast to Aunt Jennifer herself, who is bound by the constraints of married life. In the second stanza, Aunt Jennifer appears to be creating beautiful images of the tigers by using wool. but she finds it quite hard to pull even the ivory needle. She is so terrorized and tortured that she is unable to carry the weight of the wool. Her fingers flutter. The uncle's wedding band seems heavy on her hand. It suggests that she feels burdened with her marital responsibilities. Through this stanza, the poet wants to convey the fact that a woman throughout her lifetime works to glorify the tiger, her husband, but she feels so much subjugated that the marital bond becomes a burden on her. This is also the reality of Aunt Jennifer's life. The final stanza reveals that even death will not be able to release Aunt Jennifer from the trauma she had to undergo during her lifetime. Her life will be a story of her ordeals and the oppression that she was subjected to. However, the tigers created by her will be eternal. They will always be proud and unafraid. Here we get a glimpse of an often quoted conventional theme in poetry that art endures beyond human life. Perhaps the poet wants to say that women themselves are creating these tigers. They need to break their shackles and be unafraid like the tigers themselves. One more thing that can be inferred from the poem is that Aunt Jennifer, who for long has borne the miseries she was subjected to, now longs for freedom from dominance and male chauvinism. Critical appreciation of the poem. This poem was written in 1951 in the beginning of Adrienne Riche's poetic career. This poem is a vigorous protest against male chauvinism and patriarchy, which want to marginalize women in every front. This poem offers a clear statement against the traditional marriage relationship where women take the secondary role. Like Aunt Jennifer, millions of women still are living a life of deprivation and subjugation. So this poem belongs to the feminist literary genre like the poem Daddy of Sylvia Plath or the essay Women and Fiction of Virginia Woolf. Rich has used the animal imagery to inject the power and vigor in the vision of Jennifer, which she terribly misses in her personal life. Tigers are the popular symbols of power and rebellion as we find in Blake's poem. The creator of the tiger lives a life of fear, depression, and submission, but her tigers are fiercely uncompromising. Here, the tiger represents the energy which women aspire to have but lack. This poem identifies the problems of women in the society. The male-dominated society subordinates women, so they have nothing to do but continue the roles imposed on them by the male counterparts. Aunt Jennifer is the representative of these ill-fated women. Marriage as an institution does not support them. It rather ensures their eternal bondage. That's why the wedding ring is inseparable in Jennifer's life. The final stanza points at the contrast between the fearless tigers and the lifeless aunt. In fact, through this contrast, Rich is stressing at the basic idea of feminism. According to feminism, women are deprived of the equal status because of the social strictures and repressions. The tigers are beyond these norms, but Jennifer is confined within it. Let us now understand the poetic devices used by the poet in the poem Aunt Jennifer's Tigers. The word topaz metaphorically stands for yellow color. Green is a metaphor for the wild forest. The tiger is personified by the poet when she says that they pace in sleek chivalric certainty. The poet uses colorful imagery in the line, bright topaz denizens of a world of green. There is anaphora in the last two lines of the stanza. They do not fear the men beneath the tree. They pace in sleek chivalric certainty. Anaphora is when the two consecutive lines begin with the same word. Now, let us understand the poetic devices used in the next stanza. In the phrase, fingers fluttering, the poet has used alliteration. The consecutive words begin with the same sound, for. We see hyperbole in the phrase, massive weight of uncle's wedding band, because this is exaggeration. In stanza 3, in the phrase terrified hands, we see transferred epithet. Now let me tell you what is transferred epithet. Transferred epithet is a poetic device in which an unsuitable adjective is forced upon a noun. Here, terrified is the adjective which is unsuited actually for the noun hands. This phrase is also synecdoche, as the word hand represents the whole of Aunt Jennifer. The last line, the phrase prancing proud, is alliteration, as the same sound repetition of per is there. That's all for the poetic devices. The poem Aunt Jennifer's Tigers is loaded with symbolism. Let us first understand the symbol of tigers. The embroidered tigers that give the poem its title are a symbol of pride and fearlessness as they prance with chivalric certainty. These are qualities Aunt Jennifer is not able to exercise in her own life, but can grant to her creations. Through her art, these positive qualities not only exist in her life, but live on after she has died. This pride in her artful tigers allows her to leave behind a legacy that highlights her dreams and aspirations, rather than just her suffering. Next is the symbol of the wedding ring. The wedding ring Aunt Jennifer wears is a synecdoche, or a single part of a thing that stands in for a whole, for her entire unhappy marriage. She is terrified of her husband, and the ring symbolizes this with the way it weighs down her hand. The fear infects every part of her life, and it makes her struggle even when her husband is not present, such as when she is at her needlepoint. The ring is even described as her husband's rather than hers, signifying his power over her in the marriage. Later, when the speaker is describing Aunt Jennifer dead, she uses language that evokes the wedding band. Aunt Jennifer's terrified hands will lie, still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. Now there is the symbolism of sewing. Aunt Jennifer's embroidery is a symbol for her art, and more specifically for women's ability to procreate. It is how Aunt Jennifer creates her tigers and the medium through which she is able to share them with her younger relative. Though it is difficult for her to do so, she persists in her skillful embroidery and is rewarded for it with an artistic legacy full of fantastic, fearless beasts. The irony in the poem is really very interesting. It is ironical that Aunt Jennifer's creations, the tigers, will continue to pace and prance freely, while Aunt herself will remain terrified even after death, ringed by the ordeals she was controlled by in her married life. Ironically, after Aunt herself is dead, her artwork will in a sense continue to exist, with none of its vitality diminished. The tigers can be seen as symbols of the kind of powerful life that Aunt Jennifer herself was never able to live. The tigers can be seen as symbols of the artistic power that survives her even after she herself is dead. So that's all for the revision. Hope you liked it. Thank you. Happy reading.